Imagine a world where statues as tall as 10-story buildings tower over the seashore and gardens float in the air above deserts. 2 millennia ago, travelers compiled lists of amazing structures, the wonders of the world. They were symbols of the wealth, faith, and craftsmanship of ancient civilizations. We see images of them in books and films, but the reality is that almost all of these wonders have disappeared. Of the 7 legendary structures, only the pyramids in Egypt remain. What happened to the rest of these masterpieces? They turned to dust, became stones at the bottom of the ocean, or were used as foundations for residential buildings. Where did the giant structures disappear to, and why did humanity fail to preserve them? We will try to understand how the greatest monuments of history perished and what survived. This is a story about how time, cataclysms, and human madness erased what seemed eternal from the face of the earth. To understand what led to the disappearance of the wonders of the world, you need to imagine a world that was completely different. In ancient times, there was no concrete, steel, or electricity, and every building was a true feat of engineering. People spent decades extracting rare marble, transporting tons of gold, and lifting heavy blocks to great heights. However, as soon as powerful empires began to fade, their main symbols became vulnerable. The reasons for the destruction were varied and sometimes mysterious. This story of wonder began with war and victory, which seemed like divine intervention. In 355 BC, the powerful fleet of Demetrius the Besieger headed for Rhodes, using the latest military technology. The main weapon of the siege was the Tower of Heliopolis, which translated as conqueror of cities. It was a huge structure, covered with iron to protect it from fire and equipped with powerful catapults. The inhabitants of the city desperately defended their homeland for a year, using all available resources. In the end, Demetrius was forced to retreat, leaving his equipment behind. Instead of dismantling the machines, the townspeople reimagined the symbols of war, turning them into a monument to freedom. They sold the towers for a huge sum of money and invited the sculptor Chares to create a statue of the god Helios. Initially, the plan was modest, but ambitions grew rapidly. At first, the customers wanted a statue 18 meters high, but then decided to double its size. The sculptor agreed to this, not realizing that doubling the height would require 8 times more materials. Construction began in 292 BC and continued for 12 years. To lift heavy parts to such a height, Chares used an unusual method. A huge earth embankment was erected around the statue, which grew along with it. After the work was completed and the earth was removed, a bronze giant 33 meters high appeared before the people. The Colossus stood on a white marble pedestal at the entrance to the harbor. Its internal structure was a sturdy frame of iron beams and stone blocks, and on the outside it was covered with sheets of wrought bronze. Reflections of the sun's rays danced on the surface of the metal, and sailors could see its glare for many kilometers. But the giant's life was short-lived. In 226 BC, a powerful earthquake struck. The tremors were so strong that the fastenings inside its legs gave way. The bronze giant buckled at the knees and fell, crushing the buildings beneath it. This is how the expression "Colossus with feet of clay" came about, describing a combination of power and fragility. For 8 centuries, the giant lay on the shore, becoming a landmark. Pliny the Elder noted that few could wrap their hand around the statue's finger. The end came in 653 AD. Arab troops, led by the commander Muawiyah, captured the island. The new authorities viewed the ruins as a valuable resource. By their order, the remains of the bronze body were divided into pieces. A caravan of 900 camels was needed to transport the metal. The bronze was sold to a merchant who probably melted down this masterpiece into coins or weapons. Today, Only 2 columns with images of deer remain at the site where the Colossus is believed to have stood. Not a single fragment of the greatest statue of its time has survived for study. The giant disappeared into history, leaving only a memory of human pride and the fragility of man-made wonders. If the Colossus of Rhodes personified triumph, then the Lighthouse of Alexandria on the island of Pharos was the pinnacle of engineering, serving people for a millennium and a half. Its construction began around 285 BC on the initiative of Ptolemy I, a companion of Alexander the Great. The project was led by the architect Sostratus of Cnidus. Sostratus was forbidden to put his name on the structure, as the glory was to go to the king. The master carved an inscription on the stone, immortalizing his creation and dedicating it to the gods for the salvation of sailors. He then covered the inscription with a layer of plaster and inscribed the name of the ruler on top. Decades later, the plaster crumbled away in the wind, and the name of the tower's creator became known to the whole world. It was a 3-tiered lighthouse, rising more than 120 meters, making it one of the tallest buildings on the planet. The lower tier, which was square in shape, served as housing for workers and soldiers who made up the garrison. The middle tier, octagonal in shape, was decorated with bronze statues. The upper tier was cylindrical, and it was there that a fire was lit every night. In order for the light to be visible at a distance of 50 kilometers, the Greeks used a system of polished bronze mirrors. They accurately directed the rays, sending them far out into the open sea. During the day, a thick column of smoke always rose above the tower, which also served as a reliable landmark for merchant ships sailing to prosperous Alexandria from all corners of the Mediterranean. The lighthouse used a huge amount of firewood. The fuel was carried up a spiral staircase inside the tower with the help of donkeys. The lighthouse was so sturdy that it survived the collapse of the Ptolemaic Empire, the invasion of the Roman legions, and the Arab conquest. However, time and natural disasters gradually destroyed its foundation. The first significant damage occurred in 796 AD, when an earthquake destroyed the upper part of the tower along with the lighting installation. After this incident, the lighthouse lost its main function and served as a watchtower for coastal security for many years. In the middle of the 9th century, Arab rulers attempted to restore the structure, but instead of a signal fire at its top, they erected a mosque dome. It was at this time that a mysterious legend about a Byzantine spy arose. It was said that the Byzantine emperor sent a skilled deceiver to the caliph, who gained the ruler's trust and convinced him that huge treasures belonging to Alexander the Great himself were hidden under the base of the lighthouse. Succumbing to persuasion, the caliph ordered the building to be demolished immediately. The workers managed to dismantle the famous mirrors and destroy several upper tiers before the deception was exposed. Perhaps this is just a myth, but the lighthouse began to collapse at an alarming rate due to the interference with its structure. In the 14th century, nature dealt the final blow. In 1333 and 1323, 2 powerful earthquakes reduced the remains of the lighthouse to ruins of stone blocks. When the traveler Ibn Battuta visited Alexandria in 1349, he noted that the tower was in such a deplorable state that it was impossible to get inside. The ruins of huge blocks of marble and granite lay on the shore and in the water, gradually sinking into the silt. In 1477, Sultan Kite Bey, wishing to use this strategically important location to defend the city, ordered a powerful fortress to be built on the remaining ruins of the lighthouse, which has survived to this day. To save time and resources, the workers used the stones of the destroyed wonder in the construction. Thus, the lighthouse disappeared, dissolving into the walls of the medieval fort. At the end of the 20th century, in 1994, archaeologists discovered hundreds of fragments of statues and blocks weighing up to 70 tons at the bottom of the bay. These were the actual remains of the lighthouse, which had been thrown into the water during construction or collapsed due to earthquakes. While the Lighthouse of Alexandria and the Colossus of Rhodes left behind material traces discovered by archaeologists, the Hanging Gardens of Semiramis remain the most mysterious object on the list of wonders of the world. Scientists are still hotly debating whether they really existed or were just a figment of the imagination of ancient writers. According to the most widespread legend, the gardens were built in the 6th century BC by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II. He ordered this artificial wonder to be built for his wife Amytis, who came from the mountainous and green region of Media. The queen missed the coolness of the forests and the smell of flowers in dusty and hot Babylon, so her husband decided to please her by creating an entire mountain landscape on a flat plain. This structure was technically complex. The gardens were a pyramid of 4 tiers, connected by staircases made of white and pink stone. Each step of the tier was lined with slabs, covered with a layer of reeds, poured with asphalt and bricks. Lead sheets were laid on top to prevent water from seeping down and damaging the supports. Only then was a thick layer of fertile soil poured in, deep enough for massive trees to take root. From a height, it seemed as if the lush tree crowns were floating in the air, which is how the gardens got their name. One of the main mysteries of Babylon was its irrigation system. The city was located in a dry climate, and the plants required a huge amount of water. Engineers developed a unique mechanism to deliver it. Inside one of the columns were pipes through which water from the Euphrates River was lifted to the upper tiers. This was done using huge wheels equipped with leather buckets, which were rotated by slave labor. The water flowed down artificial streams and waterfalls, creating a favorable microclimate with coolness and high humidity. It was the first global irrigation system implemented in a multi-level building. It is interesting to note that the name of the gardens is associated with Semiramis, who lived 2 centuries before Nebuchadnezzar. Perhaps Greek historians simply confused the names or mixed up different legends. The gardens flourished for about 2 centuries, and it was in 33 BC, when Alexander the Great conquered Babylon, that he was struck by their beauty and made the city his capital. It is said that it was in the shade of the Hanging Gardens that the famous conqueror spent the last days of his life, enjoying the tranquility and fragrance of exotic plants. After Alexander's death, the gardens began to fall into ruin. The city gradually fell into decline, and with it, its irrigation system collapsed. Due to the cessation of water flow from the Euphrates, the trees died under the influence of the strong sun. The death of the roots, which had previously held the soil in place, led to its erosion. Severe floods washed away the foundation, which was built of unfired bricks. Unlike the stone pyramids, the Babylonian structures were built of clay, which quickly deteriorated without proper care, turning into hills. By the 1st century AD, nothing remained of the famous gardens but ruins. The Roman historian Strabo, describing this place, mentioned only the remains of arches and terraces. Over time, the desert sands completely buried the remains of the structures. In the 20th century, archaeologist Robert Koldewey, while excavating in Babylon, discovered an unusual foundation with a deep well and a system of canals. He believed that these were the famous gardens. Modern researchers offer an alternative version. In their opinion, the gardens were not in Babylon, but in Nineveh, and were built by King Sennacherib. This assumption explains the absence of inscriptions in Babylon about the construction of this object. Regardless of the circumstances, the Hanging Gardens of Semiramis have completely disappeared, without even a tiny fragment of wood remaining. Today, only dusty, excavated trenches stretch across their presumed location among the desert sands of Iraq. This creation of light was man's first step in subjugating nature, creating an artificial paradise. However, as soon as the mechanism stopped and people left the majestic city, nature took its toll. The landscape swallowed the gardens, leaving us only a beautiful legend about the king's love for his wife. The Temple of Artemis in Ephesus was not just a temple, but a real city within a city, recognized as the best building in the Greek world. Its fate is full of dramatic twists and turns, as this wonder of the world was repeatedly destroyed and then rebuilt. Construction of the large-scale version began around 550 BC. Funding was provided by King Croesus, whose name became synonymous with wealth. Architects Chersiphron and Metageon faced a serious problem. The region was prone to frequent earthquakes that could turn buildings into ruins. To withstand the forces of nature, they chose a swampy lowland for the foundation. The builders believed that the loose soil would serve as a shock absorber, absorbing the tremors. To create a reliable foundation, they dug a huge pit, which was filled with a mixture of charcoal and sheep's wool. Massive marble blocks were laid on this unusual foundation. The result was a colossal building. 127 marble columns reaching 18 meters in height supported the roof, and inside were stored works of art by the best sculptors and artists of the period. The temple served not only as a place for religious ceremonies, but also as the largest financial institution and a refuge that provided protection from persecution to anyone. For 200 years it flourished, until fate decreed its demise on the fateful night of July 21st, 356 BC. That night, Herostratus, driven by a desire for eternal glory, broke into the building and set fire to the wooden beams of the ceiling. In a matter of hours, the temple, which had taken decades to build, was reduced to ashes. The high temperature caused the marble to crack and crumble, turning the majestic structure into a pile of ruins. Legend has it that on the very night when the Temple of Artemis was engulfed in flames, Alexander the Great was born in Macedonia. The inhabitants of Ephesus found the culprit and took unusual measures to forget what had happened. But this decision had the opposite effect. The name Herostratus went down in history as a symbol of the destruction of beauty. As an adult, Alexander the Great, having conquered these lands, offered to cover the costs of rebuilding the temple, but on the condition that his name be engraved on the facade. The Ephesians showed cunning and refused the king's offer, stating that it was not fitting for other gods to build temples to the gods. As a result, the temple was restored at the expense of the townspeople by 323 BC. It became even more majestic and stood for several more centuries, surviving the conquest of Rome. The fall of the Roman Empire and the advent of Christianity marked the decline of the Temple of Artemis. In 263 AD, Ephesus was attacked by Gothic tribes. The treasures were stolen and the building was seriously damaged. However, the final blow was dealt by Emperor Theodosius I in 391, who issued a decree banning pagan cults. The Temple of Artemis was closed and dismantled. The expensive slabs were used to build Hagia Sophia in Constantinople, and the columns were used to extract lime for everyday needs. In the end, the swamp that had once saved the temple from destruction during earthquakes became the cause of its demise. Sediment and silt gradually flooded the foundation, and the ruins sank underground. By the 19th century, only a dirty puddle remained in place of this wonder of the world. It was not until 1869 that archaeologist John Wood, after many years of searching, discovered the temple's foundation 6 meters below the surface. Today, a single restored column stands on this site, on which storks build their nests. Almost nothing remains of the golden splendor of Ephesus, except for a lone pillar sticking out of the middle of the swamp. While other wonders were dedicated to the gods, this structure became an expression of pride and grief. In 353 BC, the ruler Mausoleum died in Halicarnassus. During his lifetime, he conceived of building a tomb that would surpass all temples in its splendor. After his death, construction was continued by his widow, Queen Artemisia, who preserved the memory of her husband and devoted her life to the erection of this monument. The best Greek craftsmen of the time were involved in the construction of the tomb. The mausoleum turned out to be exceptional, as it combined three different architectural styles. It was a massive rectangular structure, 45 meters high. Its base was a grandiose marble pedestal on which stood a temple with 36 columns. The culmination of the composition was a pyramid with several steps, at the top of which was a marble chariot drawn by 4 horses. Inside the carriage were statues of Mausolus himself and Artemisia. The building was striking for its whiteness and numerous stone sculptures of people and lions, which aroused admiration among contemporaries. Such an unusual structure made the king's name immortal in the history of language, and all large tombs began to be called mausoleums. Unlike other wonders, this structure demonstrated exceptional durability. It stood for 1,500 years, surviving the collapse of the empire and Alexander's conquests. The reason for its destruction was nature in the 13th century, when a series of earthquakes caused irreparable damage. The tremors destroyed the columns and pyramidal roof, turning the monument into a pile of rubble that remained untouched for 200 years. In 1404, the destruction was completed with the arrival of the Knights Hospitaller. They needed to fortify the fortress against Turkish raids and decided to use the ruins for their own purposes, reworking elements of the building for the needs of the fortifications. It is said that the knights discovered a secret chamber with a sarcophagus inside, but when they returned the next morning, they found it looted. By the 19th century, only a moat remained of the mausoleum. Fragments of the chariot are kept in the British Museum, and only debris remains at its original location. Unlike the other wonders of the world, this creation did not stand in the open air, but was located deep inside a temple. In 435 BC, the great sculptor Phidias completed work on a statue designed to embody the greatness of the supreme god of the Greeks. Zeus sat on a huge cedar throne decorated with precious stones. His gigantic figure was so large that if he had wished to stand up, the roof of the chamber would have collapsed. He was 15 meters tall. Phidias used the chryselephantine technique. The frame of the statue was wooden, but individual parts of the body were covered with ivory plates, and the clothing was covered with gold. The statue was strikingly lifelike. Zeus's eyes were framed with large, precious stones, and his head was crowned with a golden wreath of olive branches. In his right hand, he held the goddess of victory, Nike, and in his left, a scepter topped with an eagle. Pilgrims felt a deep sense of reverence. There was a legend that when Phidias was asked if he had seen the god in person before starting work, he replied that he had only been guided by descriptions from Homer's poem. It was said that after finishing the work, the sculptor asked Zeus for a sign, confirming his approval of the creation. At that moment, lightning struck the black marble floor without damaging the statue itself. To prevent the ivory from cracking due to changes in humidity and dryness, the priests constantly treated the statue with olive oil. A special pool filled with oil was dug next to the throne, which not only protected the material, but also reflected the light coming in from the doors. This created the effect of a mysterious glow that seemed to emanate from the god himself. For almost 800 years, Zeus Olympus was the main shrine of the ancient world. Even the Roman Emperor Caligula planned to move the statue to Rome to replace the image of the god with his own. According to legend, as soon as the workers approached the monument, the statue burst out laughing, causing the scaffolding to collapse and the people to flee in panic. The change in the world order marked the end of its greatness. In 391 AD, Emperor Theodosius I issued a decree banning the Olympic Games and closing all pagan temples. The Temple of Zeus was left unattended, and its luxurious decorations became easy prey for looters. At the beginning of the 5th century, around 416, it was decided to save the statue. It was dismantled and moved to Constantinople, to the private collection of a wealthy official named Larvus, where it remained for several decades, among other ancient works of art. The final tragedy occurred in 475 AD. A massive fire broke out in Constantinople, destroying entire neighborhoods of the city. Larvus's palace burned to the ground, and with it, the great statue perished in the flames. The wooden frame burst into flames instantly, the gold melted and turned to ash, and the ivory plates turned to dust. Nothing remained of one of the most expensive and majestic monuments in history, except descriptions and images on ancient coins. The temple in Olympia, where Zeus once stood, was finally destroyed by an earthquake in the 6th century. Today, only fallen columns remain at the site of the temple, reminding us of the scale of the building, and in the local museum you can see only Phidias's workshop, which archaeologists found next to the ruins. The history of the 6 lost wonders of the world is not just a list of disasters, but a vivid example of how fleeting human glory is. We have seen that neither colossal size, nor gold, nor military might could save these objects from their inevitable demise. Each of them perished in its own way. The only wonder that remains with us, the Great Pyramid of Cheops, survived only because of its extreme simplicity and incredible mass of stone, which cannot be burned or easily dismantled. All other masterpieces have become myths, forcing us to guess what they actually looked like. Today, archaeologists continue to search for fragments of these structures, hoping to piece together what once united humanity in its pursuit of perfection and beauty.